These AI-driven solutions are becoming more prevalent in AEC. What unique considerations should firms keep in mind when evaluating and integrating AI-based tools compared to traditional software?
With AI-based tools, you want to scrutinize a little bit more, like where's your data going, who's owning the data, where exactly does it live, who has access to it, and kind of go through a whole checklist of these questions, specifically drilling down on data, because it's just so important. So I think...
Welcome to this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping engineering professionals find technology that fits their needs. Did you know that 70% of software implementations fail? In the AEC industry, firms are under increasing pressure to adopt new technology, but success isn't guaranteed. Does company size and technological maturity dictate whether software adoption succeeds, or are there smarter strategies firms can use to integrate new tools effectively? In this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, I'm excited to welcome back Erin Khan, founder of Erin Khan Consulting. Erin was previously a guest on the Women in Engineering podcast, and today she joins us to speak about how firms can successfully implement and scale new software. If your firm is looking to implement new software without disrupting workflows and maximize its impact, this conversation is packed with expert insights that you will not want to miss. I'm your host, Nick Heim, and this is the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast. With that, let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our conversation of the week with Erin Khan, lead AP BD+C and EIT. Erin, hopefully I got the list of your qualifications right, but most importantly, great to have you on and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and just Erin's fine, so we'll go with that.
It makes things a lot simpler. I'm gonna have to tell our script writers just to stick to the basics, but they're great as well. But Erin, we'll get kicked off with our first question. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to start Erin Khan Consulting?
Yeah, so a little bit about me, my background. So born and raised in New York, came out to school in Los Angeles, California to study civil engineering at USC. And I started as a project engineer intern in the field, helping to renovate one of the buildings on campus. And it was just very eye-opening. So number one, I realized, wow, I really love teamwork and, working on projects together to build something that is going to be used for years and years and years. And then also number two, like, where the heck is the technology? So those were really my, formative experiences in my entry to the construction industry. And that's kind of really shaped my journey, I think. So I spent some time in the field working on various historical renovation projects in LA. But I always kept coming back to the technology side because it was just such a powerful way to be more efficient, effective, and safer in the field. So, after I think 6 years or so, I eventually was at Suffolk Construction as the National Director of Construction Solutions for a little bit. And then that opportunity, well, first as a regional director, later on in the national role, but that opportunity really allowed me to focus just on innovation and technology for operations full time, which is one of the coolest things ever. So if anybody's ever interested in tech and innovation, I recommend looking for those roles or maybe creating them. But that basically led me to, my interest in also working with startups. So while being at Suffolk Construction, I also had the opportunity to partner with the Suffolk Technologies team, which invests in startups. So that meant I was working, also on the operational side while also partnering with startups that were kind of creating the tools of tomorrow or today, I guess you could say. And then I think I kind of got to a point where most people probably get at some point in their careers where it's like, I'm kind of tired of the big corporate thing. I always wanted to do something on my own at some point. So to really kind of scratch that itch, I started my own consulting firm a couple of years ago, Erin Khan Consulting. Wasn't too creative with the name, but the goal is basically to do more of the same stuff that I've already been doing, which is helping contractors find the right solutions for their organizations and helping them to scale those up. and then also working with startups to connect better with the construction industry. So yeah, that's pretty much the story about me and how I got started with my consulting practice.
It's great. Great summary, Aaron, and I can relate. However many years ago it was, coming out of a civil engineering degree program, first inspection, pen and paper, and I just could not believe that, like, I went to school, had all this great, education and technology, and that's what we were doing first day on the job. So I think many
Yeah,
of us can relate, and I also like your point on finding and creating those types of positions because, your business is essentially built off the fact that this stuff just doesn't happen on its own. And
right.
firms and individuals need a lot of help figuring this type of stuff out.
100%.
So Aaron, that leads me into my next question, which has to do more with the firms and how technology comes about in them. So how do a firm's size and level of technological maturity influence its ability to adopt and scale new software successfully?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question, and I feel like we could probably go down a rabbit hole here, but I'll keep it, fairly high level because I know we have a lot to get to today. But the way I think about it, especially with considering the two factors of size and technical maturity, it's kind of like a nice quadrant, if you will. So if you're a large tech company and the culture of your company is tech embracing or tech forward, you're going to have a high capability to adopt because you're going to have more resources, probably a bit more people on your team. Maybe you have a dedicated department, but you're going to go at somewhat of an average speed of change. So change is really hard. If you're a bigger company, it's a little bit harder to steer a larger ship. So that's kind of how I frame it. If you're a large company, but you don't have the culture piece and your teams are very tech wary or tech skeptical, yes, you'll have the big capacity for change, but you're going to go really, really slow because you're probably going to be fighting that culture that whole way. And then on the flip side, so with the smaller types of companies, they are much more agile. So smaller company, if they're tech embracing, they're excited about technology, good culture, they may not have too many resources. Maybe it's a limited budget. Maybe they only have like one person, or maybe it's, half a role from IT that's being loaned to innovation. But they're going to be able to change at a much faster rate. So if they identify, a high priority, all right, we're ready to go, they can go ahead and adopt if it's, the right solution for them. And then we have kind of on the lower end of the spectrum here, a smaller company, tech wary or tech skeptical. They're going to have, very low capacity, not super, agile or fast about adopting. So they'll kind of plod along and maybe look at some stuff here and there and eventually decide to change when it becomes really urgent. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting scale. Maybe one day I'll map it out and visualize it, but that's basically how I kind of frame it.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of like an Eisenhower matrix, the
Probably. Yeah.
urgent, not urgent, high, low
Yeah, yeah.
priority.
Yeah.
And it
Pretty
sounds
close.
like you've worked with companies of kind of all flavors, because I can definitely sense from my experience how some of that might go, but that's the unique value proposition you bring as a consultant, because you're not just working with a firm or two, right? You're working with what sounds like a number of them, being able to draw on
Variety.
experience.
Yeah. 100%.
And it is really interesting, Aaron, because you probably experienced this. It's stuff like is you get like how it's done like at your firm, but like that could be so different even within the same
Oh,
vertical.
yeah, absolutely. So, no two companies are alike, even within the same company, like no two projects are alike. So there's always going to be these like little disparities or different experiences across the board, which I feel in part leads to all the different like types of solutions that we see on the market because the quantity and like just the sheer diversity of the startups that are on the market, it's just reflecting the diversity of the industry itself. So yeah, a lot of unique experiences.
Which I'm sure is for those startups is probably at least somewhat reflected in the handful of their first couple of customers, because they're so focused on
Hmm.
the needs of their customers, which then ultimately drives the product based on whoever they happen to bump into early in the development of their product.
Right, right, right.
And so everyone's favorite topic, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I had another interview earlier today, and I'm gonna basically say the same thing to you, is that it's out there. Everyone's becoming more aware of it. I think use cases are a big question mark in a lot of firms, but if these AI driven solutions are becoming more prevalent in AEC, what unique considerations should firms keep in mind when evaluating and integrating AI based tools compared to traditional software?
Yeah. So I'll keep this fairly high level, but with AI-based tools, you want to scrutinize quite a little bit more, like where's your data going? Who's owning the data? Where exactly does it live? Who has access to it? And kind of go through a whole checklist of these questions, specifically drilling down on data because it's just so important. So I think one of the considerations, even if we just consider like ChatGPT, right? So if you drop something in there, like you're training a public database essentially. So you really need to question and understand first, like, okay, what is this data pipeline? What's the life cycle of my data? Because it will become super important later down the line when you're talking about privacy concerns and potential data breaches and all sorts of things that tie into responsible use of AI. So taking an extra fine lens to data is top of mind. And then one other thing as well, which is coming back to the people side, the experience side of AI tools. So is your workforce trained and ready to use AI-driven solutions responsibly? And I key in on that word responsibly because again, when we're talking about AI, there's just a whole nother level of like ethical considerations. Again, going back to like data privacy, understanding what the tool is giving you. And again, it is just a tool at the end of the day. Knowing when and how to discern, what's trustworthy from these solutions. And these are skills that nobody's really taught. So, we're all kind of going into this together, right? So we have our whole workforce in AEC where this is all new to us. So we have to make sure that we're having some level of, responsibility when we're going in to use these new types of tools. So similar to, you go on site, you put on your safety glasses, your hard hat, your vest, your boots, your gloves. When we go to use AI tools, are we thinking about, okay, where's this information going? How much am I trusting it? How can I verify the source? All these things kind of need to be taken into consideration.
Which makes a lot of sense. And the difference, a parallel is the difference between these AI native tools and other software in the past, and now how you would treat the output of just any software we're all relatively familiar with, and then anything generated by AI. And you're right, it's not
Mm.
being taught, and I don't know that every company even realizes that you need to specifically train on these tools, because they're unlike, I think, anything that most of your workforce has had in the past. And just because you
Hmm.
can go to Copilot or Chat GPT and start typing it in doesn't mean there's not a lot of training and scrutiny that shouldn't be applied.
Yeah. And I think what I've seen, early adopters do, especially for AI types of solutions, is just start with a basic policy. So that's a good starting point, like, hey, let's come up with a company policy for AI. Typically, it's folded into something like your like IT do's and don'ts in your handbook for your company. But that it's a good starting point, right? So at least there's some sort of clear delineation of where the company stands on this is okay and this is not okay. So it's okay to take, baby steps. Like we don't have to just blast this out all at once. But yeah, it's something that will need to grow and I think strengthen as a muscle throughout the industry is kind of how to address using these solutions effectively and safely.
And I like that idea, Aaron, of just taking it to baby steps, because it can be pretty overwhelming,
Yeah.
even for like people like us who are just, into this stuff and working on it on a daily basis. And then
Yeah.
you think of just the person who's trying to get their job done and, make it home safely at the end of the day. It's a lot to take on. So just as as a leadership group, like the idea of chunking it out, making sure people have the time to actually absorb what's going on, I think is also really important.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the chunking it out, bite-sized bits, pace it so you don't get like blasted by all the new information, but yeah.
And you had mentioned, culture and mindset previously, which I think that's pretty much what a lot of this comes down to. So then, Aaron, my next question is, what are some common misconceptions AEC firms have about digital transformation, and how can they shift their mindset to embrace technology more efficiently?
Yeah, so I would key in on, yeah, so I'll put this out there as a misconception, and it's not necessarily AI, it's just kind of generalized technology, but especially in AEC and like especially so, even more so in construction, there's a perception that technology will take jobs. And I I don't think that's quite the case. To reframe it for a lot of the industry that's out there, technology, it's just another tool in your toolbox. And what will happen is that the workers who are using a slightly better tool will take the jobs of workers who are using older tools that aren't as effective or efficient. So that's one kind of misconception or perception that I want to address and just kind of reframe for the industry, because there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of lack of trust with anything that's going to shake up a process. But it's worth giving the technology a chance. Of course, not it's not always going to be a walk in the park or 100%, I guess value driven thing, but it's going to make things better, and it will get better, especially if us as industry professionals are giving feedback and kind of working together to make these tools exactly what we need and want them to be. Also, in construction, like we have a huge labor shortage that needs to be addressed somehow. So yes, we can, do a lot of efforts to recruit in more people into our industry, but there's going to have to be some sort of extra boost to help, make things a little bit easier, a little bit more attractive, and that is basically going to be technology. So by embracing tech and having like this good culture and mindset towards it, we're opening up a lot of opportunities, not just for our own selves and our like day-to-day working life, but also for, the incoming workforce for years to come.
Really nice summary, Aaron, and a couple of points that, I could relate to. Just as in construction, I think it's more of a discussion around like the shortage of craft labor. I know here on the, civil engineering side, it's the same idea, just declining enrollment, not enough people to backfill those who are leaving the industry, whether by choice or retirement. And then, yeah, there's also the idea of individuals coming in, especially those graduating college, have a lot of options. And by, let's say, providing an environment that I think a lot more aligns with their expectations, like I said, my first day on the job was going around a roof, marking out defects on pen and paper. I thought that was crazy. And, over time I learned I wasn't the only one. And I think if we're still taking that attitude in 2025, it kind of makes sense why we're seeing less and less individuals come into the industry, because there's competition for their talent.
Right. Right.
So Aaron, we've talked about the strategy at the firm level. We've talked about a little bit at the individual level, but I'd also like to talk more in the details at the firm level when it comes to new technology or software. So what elements should firms have in place before piloting or testing new software? And can you speak to both like the technical use cases in the field and then more for, I guess, like the business leaders and what they're looking for?
Yeah, this is another one where it's like, wow, we could spend, or I could spend a few hours on this, but to break it down to just some key takeaways, I guess for overall, like number one is understanding the problem you're trying to solve and why you're trying to solve it. So that is a really big one when teams go to pilot something that they may not necessarily have as thought out or as solidified as they thought. So just taking your time and physically like write down or type down, put it somewhere, document it somewhere, what your requirements are, and like what exactly is it, the challenge that you're trying to tackle. So there's a lot of shiny object syndrome in the industry, especially with all the cool AI stuff that's out there that's kind of being like, taking your attention away from things. But if you have a really clear understanding of what it is you're trying to solve, that helps keep you focused, make sure that you're not wasting your time piloting a bunch of stuff that ultimately isn't going to solve your problem. So I always recommend doing that somewhere in the process, hopefully as step, one or step zero. From, I guess, so yeah, so that's kind of like the management side, I guess, documenting your requirements, what it is you're tackling. From the field side, and this is maybe a little bit different, but it's really important to identify who your innovation champion is. So this is somebody internally, boots on the ground or hands on keyboard, who's actually doing the work, who will act as an SME. They'll be really involved with, testing the platform or whatever the new solution is. They will be engaged in giving feedback, and they are genuinely passionate about improving things. So that's number one. I think a lot of times when teams go to pilot solutions, they look for team members that might be a little bit more like tech-minded or, good with computers, but that doesn't really matter as much as how passionate they are about improving anything. So yeah, that passion goes a long way. They end up kind of, again, championing. I come back to the word champion, the solution, to say like, hey, look at this, like get involved. Let's, test this workflow out in the field together. So finding those people go a long way with driving a good pilot program. And there's so much, but the last thing I'll pick is, of course, you want the buy-in from, boots on the ground. You also want buy-in from strategic leadership. I think that comes into play, from our leadership teams. They should have a strategic roadmap for long-term vision of the company. So, you should have something from your leadership that says, hey, maybe in the next year or, 1 to 5 years, whatever the time period is, we want to improve our safety metrics from this to this. And how are we going to get there? So having that strategic roadmap and also having leadership buy-in into investing back into technology and continuous improvement really helps steer the interests. So that, again, you're not just doing pilots willy-nilly, you're kind of really targeting some of the core things that are going to drive long-term goals for your organization. That was a lot top of mind, but yeah, it's such a good topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I know even, my company, this is what we're constantly talking about. And the first thing I heard from Erin is just those, right, we call them problems worth solving, but there's some sort of business problem. There's a reason you're going to the market to go find a solution. And as you said, writing that down and making that clear from the start. And going back to mindset, the champion isn't necessarily the most technologically adept, but they have the mindset of, I want to be helpful, I want to be useful, I want to make the situation better and be part of the solution. I got it all. The more I think about this, Aaron, the more I feel like I should have just went and got a degree in psychology. Maybe engineering wasn't the best path for this, but it all comes back to people, mindset, and culture.
And it's so funny that we talk about my degree is civil engineering or, whatever engineering based background. But when I speak to more and more people that are getting into these roles, it's like, oh yeah, I started as like a bio major, or I was a history major, or more recently in one of my conversations yesterday, just an upcoming project engineer that's getting into technology, like, oh yeah, I studied communications. I'm like, oh, that's perfect, because you need to communicate some of these really tough things to a crowd that doesn't want to receive it. So being able to communicate and influence is yeah, one of those like essential, like truly essential skills to be good at tech and innovation in AEC, which is kind of funny to think about, but yeah.
And it creates, I would say, a lot of opportunity that otherwise wouldn't be realized if, you're a company that's like, hey,
Hmm.
you have to have an engineering or a construction management background. Now you're able to fill these types of positions that really have a force multiplier effect with, let's just say, less traditional backgrounds to get there, which is
Yeah.
exciting.
I like that phrase, force multiplier. Yeah.
Then I call this, it's like if you watched Iron Man, you're putting on the Iron Man suit. It
Yeah.
allowed Mr. Stark to do a lot more, but as we learn in the movies, it is the man that makes the suit, not the other way around, or the woman that makes the suit. So it's not a replacement for us. It's just a force multiplier.
Love it.
So Aaron, we've talked about firms, we've talked about individuals, and now I'd like to get your opinion on startups. So
Hmm.
there's a lot out there. The idea I think that startups have of this industry and what actually occurs in the field don't always match up. So, what are some of the biggest barriers AEC firms face when adopting new technologies, and how can startups better align their solutions with industry needs to improve adoption?
Yeah, there's a lot on this topic as well. A couple things that immediately pop come to mind or pop up for me. Ease of use is huge. So I always come back to like personal experience of, being with the field team. They take out their iPad, they try to open the app, maybe they get the app open, and then it just doesn't work. It doesn't load, doesn't take them where they want. They end up throwing it out, and then they pull up their paper copies because it was just a couple seconds faster, and easier for them to find the information they needed. So ease of use with the solution is really important. Seconds matter so much more out in the field than you might think. So that's one that I always kind of touch on. Another thing that startups can do, which I think has been getting better over the years, but still kind of surprised here and there, is providing sandbox testing. So let's say a company's interested in using the solution and they say like, hey, like we want to get this, but we just need to test and make sure that, it's not going to break anything once we go to, bring this new solution into our tech stack. So having those sandbox systems like really ready to go and easy to deploy and get people into, I think will help a little bit with, one, addressing any fears of things not working or just needing to give an extra level of assurance. And then, two, just like providing a genuine good experience so that there's just transparency, right? So with that sandbox, it does help to get an early batch of, end users in so that they can say like, hey, actually, this is really cool. They'll go out and tell their teams like, hey, this new platform's coming. It's going to be a game changer. So hopefully there's some good stuff that comes out of that sandbox experience. And then the last thing, which is not necessarily just on startups, I think this is kind of something for both startups and contractors to, or, any AEC firm to really kind of partner on, but it's training. So the, I guess the adoption is as good as your least like technologically agile individual on the team. And that only gets improved through training that's hands-on, that's one-on-one, and it takes a lot of time. It's kind of painful, but it's worth the investment ultimately. So if you're not telling your teams like, hey, press this button and press this button, they're not going to press the buttons. So yeah, you need to tell them, where to click, what to do, which then ties right back into ease of use, and the whole cycle continues. So yeah, those are a few things. There's definitely, again, a lot more, but yeah, thanks for asking that one. It's a good one.
Absolutely. And Aaron, it's almost like you've been looking over our shoulders here at the company I work for because I think when you're more adept at this type of stuff, or you're the one, like you're the champion, it becomes easy to say, yeah, it's just a couple of button clicks, whatever. But what we figured out and got to the point really quickly was we just needed to provide just PDF guides and say, just
Yep.
these are the exact button clicks you do. There's great SOP software out there for that type of work, but it was really important because you might take for granted how easy or simple something is, and
Mm-hmm.
that could be really challenging for someone else. So just spelling it out very clearly, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah. And it also it ties into so many things, which is like standard operating procedure, consistency across projects, consistency of your client experience across projects. So yeah, we don't want like 10 different ways of doing something. We hopefully have found maybe one or two that is, best path of travel that works for most projects. So yeah.
And to the startup portion of the questionnaire, I thought your response was excellent. One thing I will add, and this just comes from personal experience, is like if
Yeah.
you're a startup, go out and mimic your ideal customer's field conditions and just use it for yourself. And I've seen even like founders and co-founders sit and be like, I had no idea it took 20
Mm-hmm.
clicks to do this very simple operation. And as simple as it sounds, it's eye-opening. And customer feedback is great, and that's kind of the engine because you can't be everywhere at once. But when you experience it firsthand, I think it's really powerful. So if you're a startup, just get out
Yeah.
into the field and test your own stuff because you might be surprised at what you find.
It's it's such a good insight there. And I always come back to like it, empathy and emotional intelligence, and like, can you actually put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to reach? So yeah, to your point, Nick, like literally just go do it. Yeah, that's an awesome add-on to that whole discussion.
Absolutely. And Aaron, this will be the question we will wrap the interview up with. But any final pieces of advice you can offer to AEC professionals that are looking to implement new software in their organizations?
Yeah, so I guess, we kind of talked a lot about some specific things, but maybe on a higher level note is to really focus on partnerships and be curious. So if you're working with a tech provider, be really collaborative or collaborative as possible. And don't be afraid to, maybe challenge that tech partner a little bit and say, like, hey, I really want to see this type of workflow. What can we do to get us there together in the solution? So it kind of goes both ways as well, but tech providers also have they should have a really different but also valuable skill set that they're offering to, us as AEC professionals. So especially with getting into AI, that I think that's an area where us in the industry, we don't typically have, degrees or experts in house traditionally that know everything about AI, but we can rely on our tech partners who are a bit more familiar with these things to educate us and help us, get steered in the right direction. So I always emphasize that collaboration piece because I don't think we work together enough. We're such a siloed industry. So there's some really good things that can come out of smart collaborations. And just get used to change. So we were even chatting just before this, Nick, like, yeah, there's always something that's shaking something up somewhere. So the only thing we can really count on is that there's going to be disruption, whether it's artificial intelligence or, robotics or, labor shortage, I don't know, whatever comes up for our industry. But there is change that's going to be constant. So the more that we can, boost our I would say like our change muscle, adoption muscle for new solutions. I don't know, that just helps us, I guess, be more resilient over time and remain competitive and be able to deliver in an increasingly demanding environment. So, yeah, this is just the start.
Just the start, indeed. And I think, and Erin, I think we as an industry lag behind. Like if you look at just
Yeah,
tech
just
in
a little
general,
bit, kind of a
yeah,
lot of
and
it.
and I know the vertical I'm in of the industry is I tell people if you think engineering slow, if you think construction slow, well just wait because we're even slower. And I think that has its positives because it gives you time to adapt if you're a forward thinking company, but you also just don't want to.
Hmm.
You don't want things to come along in one day. What you thought was a sure thing just kind of disappears overnight. So it's good that firms have people like you as a resource to look to and kind of understand how change may affect their org.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would also mention too that for some of the topics, maybe not all, but for a good amount of them, I do go into more depth on some articles on my blog, on my website. So anybody tuning in, feel free to check those out. So it has some more thoughts and maybe some more concrete things related to the discussion.
Absolutely. And Erin, only so much we can cover on a single episode. So thank you again for taking the time to join us today. If the audience does want to connect with you, whether it be on a deeper dive into some of these topics or just connecting in general, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so you can find me and message me on LinkedIn, Erin Khan, ErinKhan, or send me an email, Erin@Erin Khan Consulting. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Erin, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate being on.
You got it. Till next time. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you will find a summary of key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering and technology endeavors. Thank you.